2020, and this is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Elmhurst City Council. The time is 7:32 p.m. Please rise to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I will now call the roll. Park?
Here.
Levin?
Here.
Kennedy?
Here.
Honquist? Absent. Brennan?
Here.
Mulliner?
Here.
Deuter?
Here.
Barimus?
Here.
Leader, I'm sorry, guys. Vacancy. Dunn?
Here.
Bram?
Here.
Polumsky?
Here.
Cahill?
Here.
Toledo?
Here.
12 present, 1 absent, 1 vacancy. We have a quorum. Before we move to the next,
Clerk Tamer.
okay, thank you. 13 present. Mr. Honquist entered, Alderman Honquist.
Thank you.
13 present, 0 absent, 1 vacancy. We have a quorum. Before we move to the next item, may I please have a motion to appoint Alderman Mulliner, longest-serving alderman, to preside as mayor pro tem for tonight's meeting. Alderman Bram, motioned, second. Alderman Dunn. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Should probably do a roll call. Roll call.
You want me to roll call? Okay. All right, Park? We're going to call the roll. Levin?
Aye.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Honquist?
Aye.
Brennan?
Aye.
Mulliner?
Aye.
Deuter?
Aye.
Barimus?
Aye.
Dunn?
Aye.
Bram?
Aye.
Polumsky?
Aye.
Cahill?
Aye.
Toledo?
Aye.
13 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries.
Thank you. In light of the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak, the mayor of the city of Elmhurst has determined that an in-person meeting on September 21st is not always practical or prudent, so we are allowing people to communicate electronically to this meeting. In this particular case, all elected officials are present, but we have the system set up for public comment and people to listen in. So on to written communications. Were there any written communications?
None submitted.
None submitted.
I'm going to double check really quick. No, there's been none submitted.
Okay, does anyone have any from the audience? Okay, on to public comment. Is anyone here for the public comment? I'm going to start with the people who are online, and then we'll move to the people who are here. Is there anyone online who would like to make a public comment? I'm going to take that as a no. So we'll move on to people in the audience.
Okay, we have Claude Pogosh.
Claude, remember the 3-minute rule. We'll give you a gentle reminder at the end of 3 minutes. Address your comments to the chair and state your name. Address is optional.
Claude Pagach, 566 West Gladys. I haven't been around for a while. I've been paying attention to the council over the telecast. What I find frustrating is the fact that the council has given away executive authority to make decisions. And why have a council? Why have committees? Committees hear both sides. The executive comes in and says, this is what I decided. And with a 13-1 council, it passes without any thought at all. I still don't understand why a legislative body would give up its right to consider both sides of an argument, no matter what the subject is. In December, this council voted in the city property tax and at the same time voted in $10 million worth of general obligation bonds. It's fascinating. Because no alderman made a statement of just how far in debt this city is. It's not unusual. Park District does it. School District does it. But then February came rolling along, and the head of finance said, we don't have the money. Maybe even no money even to pay the interest. The public knows what their mortgage is. Public knows if they got a loan out, how much they got to pay off. But this council continues to spend money and buy general obligation bonds, and finance, and no alderman ever makes a public statement saying, I hate to tell you people out there, but you owe $150 million. And that is not unusual for this body, for the school board, again, for the Park District. Why? People know what their mortgage is, how much you have to pay. Why is this council so reluctant to make a public statement, this is how far we've taken you into debt? All for good reasons. But why? Why not just tell the public and the school board and the Park District, so those residents out there that vote you in can really appreciate how much they owe? There's been quite a few people that have left this town. Home taxes are driving them out. The state is broke. And with this COVID virus, I'm assured this town and the county and the state are going to struggle
Would you please wrap up?
at the end of the year. So in the future, I'd appreciate if you're going to vote in $10 million, $20 million, $30 million worth of general obligation bonds for good causes, you tell the people just how much they really do have to pay off.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and we'll move on to announcements. Does anyone on the council have an announcement that they'd like to make? Alderman Plumsky.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Your used soccer gear can make a difference. Since 2017, the Stuckel family has been running soccer gear for Zambia. They're having a drive-up and drop-off gear collection event on Saturday, September 26th, 8 to 11 a.m. at the Abbey at 407 St. Charles Road. They're seeking soccer uniform sets, balls and cleats, coach and goalie gear, pumps, whistles, nets, and first aid kits. You can visit soccergearzambia.wordpress.com for more information.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay.
City Clerk.
April 6th is the consolidated election. Those that are seeking to run for local political office on April 6, 2021, may pick up candidate packets from the clerk's office, second floor, beginning last Tuesday, September 15th. There are 8 alderman seats, 1 for each of the 7 wards are up, 2 in the first ward. Mayor, city clerk, and city treasurer are up for election. The first date to circulate these petitions for candidacy is tomorrow, Tuesday, September 22nd, 2020. Candidate filing will take place Monday, December 14th, 2020 through December 21st at the clerk office on the second floor in City Hall. More information can be found on the city website and in the candidate packets. For the upcoming election of November 3rd, early voting will begin this week, September 24th, at the DuPage County Fairgrounds, and then at City Hall, October 19th through October 31st. The hours here at City Hall are Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m., Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. For additional locations and extended hours, visit the DuPage County Election Commission website or call the DuPage Election Commission at 630-407-5600. Also on September 24th, the county will begin mailing out vote-by-mail ballots. Also, a box will be available for drop-off during early voting at City Hall for those mail-in ballots. The other thing is we have until September 30th to respond to the census. So see the city website for more details for those that haven't responded. Last, the Commission on Youth is hosting on October 8th, Understanding Preventing Racial Bullying in Youth, an educational panel. It's from 7 to 8:30. It'll be here, but it'll be live on YouTube for the residents. It's a virtual event, panel of specialists. We're discussing on ways to build empathy, awareness, equality, and inclusion in our youth to prevent racial bullying. Appropriate for ages 9 and over, and if anyone has any questions or would like to submit a comment or a personal story, please reach out to me. My email is jackie.haddad-tamer@elmhurst.org. And that is all I have.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. I need a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Oh, wait. We want to remove items from the consent agenda. Does anyone have any items to remove? Alderman Toledo.
5.12.
5.12 will be pulled. Alderman Braham. 5.19. Anything else? Okay, seeing none, I'll need a motion to approve the consent agenda minus items 5.12 and 5.19. Alderman Braham, Alderman Kennedy, seconds. Roll call, please.
Park? Levin?
Aye.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Honquist?
Aye.
Brennan?
Aye.
Mulliner?
Aye.
Deuter?
Aye.
Remus?
Aye.
Dunn?
Aye.
Braham?
Aye.
Palumski?
Aye.
Cahill?
Aye.
Toledo?
Aye.
13 ayes, 0 nays, 1 vacancy.
13 ayes, 0 nays, 1 vacancy. The consent agenda passes unanimously. Now on to item 5.12. I'm just going to turn to the person who pulled it because I know what she wants to do. Alderman Toledo.
Thank you. I would just like to pull this report back to committee for further review.
Okay, thank you. That's the prerogative of the chair of the committee, so we're going to allow that to go back to committee. 5.19, I need a motion to approve 5.19. Alderman Levin, I need a second. Alderman Honquist. Alderman Levin, any comment?
No comment.
Okay. Alderman Braham, you pulled this report?
Yes, thank you. And there was a communication, I believe it was earlier today, in regards to what executive orders have been completed since this has been in place. And if my memory serves me correctly, it was 5 in total, all of which, as I've said in the past, that except one, I believe we should have utilized our current method or procedures, which is going through committee and city council. As everyone here knows, and maybe the public needs to know, is that we also have the ability to suspend the rules if there is some urgent reason on why we needed to pass something within one city council meeting, being the report and ordinance or resolution. I still do not feel that there is a need. I know that the agenda was updated today, so I haven't had a chance to review what the changes in the executive order were, if any. But I do know that there was an email sent today, which I think is troublesome to have something of potentially, since I haven't been able to review it, significant change updated on the agenda the same day that we will be voting on it. With those statements, I cannot support this at this time.
Any other comments? Okay, so that the public is aware, the only change that occurred in this ordinance was a date change, and that has to do with the fact that the governor extended his executive order as of Saturday, so we had to make sure that the dates were correct, and that was a change that was just made. That's the only change in the executive order, in this ordinance. So, roll call, please.
Park? Aye. Levin?
Aye.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Honquist?
Aye.
Brennan?
Aye.
Mulliner?
Aye.
Deuter?
Aye.
Remus?
Aye.
Dunn?
Aye.
Braham?
No.
Palumski?
Aye.
Cahill,
Aye.
Toledo,
Aye.
12 ayes, 1 nay, 1 vacancy.
12 ayes, 1 nay, 1 vacancy. That ordinance passes. We'll now move on to committee reports. We have 2 committee reports in front of us. Clerk, Tamer, would you read the recommendation paragraphs for 6.1?
It is therefore the recommendation of the Public Works and Buildings Committee that the City Council budget $96,000 with an appropriate funding source for individual home flood proofing in the Crestview Park neighborhood in the budget years that funds are made available, and that staff be authorized to approve property flood proofing improvements for reimbursement. Signed, Jim Kennedy, Chair, Mike Brennan, Vice Chair, and Alderman Brian P. Cahill.
Okay, I need a motion, so I'll look to the chairman. Alderman Kennedy moves, and Alderman Brennan seconds. Your report?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just to start off on this, obviously, we've been at the subject of stormwater for a long time, and I want to bring everybody back to the definition of flooding as it relates to these stormwater projects. And it's related to instances where we cannot keep the stormwater in the public right-of-way. So it's gone beyond the curbs, it's gone beyond the sidewalks, and that water ends up against people's foundations and ultimately in their basements. So I think that's important to just keep that in mind as we step forward on this. The projects here for Crestview and then in the subsequent report in Brenhaven generally are going to talk about the same thing, so I'm not going to repeat myself when we get to that, but they both apply. In these areas, the work started off with initial project reviews by the Christopher Burke study, and they identified both Crestview and Brenhaven as areas that had that overland flooding that directly affected homes. In both cases, we looked for infrastructure and for public options, whether they be schools or parks, and we didn't find anything. There was nothing there. We did even look further for home purchases like we've done in other areas, and again, we didn't get enough traction. And so when we looked at what the options were, and we've said from the very beginning, any homes that had that overland flooding, we would ultimately help. It came down to an option around individual home flood proofing as the one option that really made the most sense in these areas. So as a committee looked at this, we wanted to, we had a good feel. We went out taking the Christopher Burke engineering study that identified a number of homes. We then, with the help of city staff, took information on previous flooding events and feedback that we've gotten from the homeowners, took those 2 pieces of information, and then went back out to those areas to confirm definitively that those homes had that overland flooding. So in the case of Crestview, that number started with 15. We went out to each of those 15 homes multiple times over several months and came back and found that really only 8 of those homes had that type of overland flooding that's ultimately reflected in this report here. So, I think we did a very good job of identifying what those homes were. Certainly, there would be a question is, did we get them all? I think the answer to that is yes. Is there a chance that someone could raise their hand and say, hey, you missed us? Well, I think there is a chance, but I think it's a very small one given all the due diligence that was done in this case. You'll see we did put money in for a contingency, so in the very rare event that we did miss somebody, we've got money in the budget or in the report, and ultimately, should it be budgeted, to cover for those things. So as we look as part of this, we identified what the solutions were is, okay, how do we protect the investment for the city? And so there was a lot of debate on how that could be done, and what the committee came back with was to put in a clawback provision. So what that allows us to do is that any time in the 5 years from when these projects get put in place, that if the home were to be sold for a knockdown, we as a city would be able to claw back that money, 20% per year over those, reducing over that 5-year period. So that helps ensure that the money is well spent and that the homeowners are serious about what's going to happen in their area. You know, as we look at this at the project, and you see in the report, when we looked at the infrastructure, you know, we're talking millions of dollars, whereas the individual home flood proofing is in the tens of thousands and adds up to just about 200,000 in total. So, you know, as it stands, and, you know, certainly Alderman Toledo, you know, had, you know, mentioned to me, you know, we do not have a current funding source for this, right? In all of our previous stormwater projects, we had, you know, gone out and done GO bonds, or we'd put it against, you know, funds in the budget. We don't have those monies now. Certainly our challenge will be to identify a source in 2021, or if we need to do it in a subsequent year, we do it at that point. So with that, I will close my comments and open it to others.
Okay. Alderman Brennan.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'd like to add to Alderman Kennedy's comments. It's my view that the stormwater improvement projects being proposed in both the Crestview and Brunhaven subdivisions are the most cost-effective way for the city to address stormwater needs in both those areas. The cost per house for both projects is well below the cost per house of the other stormwater projects that we've completed to date. There was and has been healthy discussion on whether or not the homeowners should share in the cost of these projects. I've been on both sides of this argument, and through robust debate, have landed on the side of the homeowners should not share in the cost of these projects. The primary driver for my position is the city hasn't asked any other homeowner who has benefited from completed stormwater improvement projects to share in the direct costs. So why should we start with Crestview and Brunhaven residents? The alternative, as Alderman Kennedy indicated, is a very large and very costly stormwater detention project that would run multiple millions of dollars. So therefore, I will be supporting the report.
Thank you. Any other comments? Alderman Deuter.
Thank you very much. You know, first I want to acknowledge the hard work that is reflected in these reports. I recently moved off Public Works and Buildings Committee, but during the 5 years that I did serve on the committee, this was a topic, both floodproofing and stormwater relief to these two areas, that came up many, many times. So I know that there's a lot of hard work, a lot of thought put in from both staff and the committee that's reflected in these reports, so I appreciate that. I also want to be clear that I completely agree with the committee's recognition that a public infrastructure or detention project isn't feasible for these two areas that we're discussing tonight. The total cost of the project and the cost per home makes it something that the city is really unlikely to take, certainly not in the near future and perhaps not ever. So I completely agree that when we look at these two areas, floodproofing is the right way to think about relief in those areas. So I do want to make a distinction between the public infrastructure projects that we've done in other areas and what's being proposed here. I think when we think about the infrastructure projects and the detention, those are projects that actually increase the city's capacity. They also reduce the level of flooding, and those are benefits to the entire city, certainly everyone who lives in that area, but really citywide. When we're looking at the floodproofing projects, they're not increasing our system's capacity and they're not reducing the level of flooding. What we're doing with these projects are looking at a particular home and making sure that the water that surrounds it is not getting in. So the benefit is directly provided to that homeowner. The committee's approach is looking at the city bearing the full cost of the improvements to floodproof these affected homes. And I think that's where my perspective is different than the committee's perspective. I believe it's important to have the homeowners share a portion of that cost. And as I was thinking about the floodproofing program, I really am kind of aligning it with the programs that we offer for the overhead sewer program and the check valve program. In those cases, the people who participate in those programs are homeowners that have had a sanitary sewer backup in their home. The majority of the time when that happens, it's because the city's sanitary sewer system is not functioning as it should. It's an issue with that system. So we recognize that to get that system up to where it needs to operate, to prevent the sewage backups, it would be an extraordinary amount of money and be a very long-term project. And that work has begun. We've done a deep dive in one area of the city, and we're moving that work to improve our sanitary sewer system into other areas. But in the meantime, I think our overhead sewer program and our check valve program recognizes that the city has some responsibility to help protect those homes, and it asks the homeowners to share half of that cost. So I think we have taken a very prudent approach with those programs, and in addition to asking the homeowners pay half of that cost, those two programs, overhead sewer and check valve, also require some type of public benefit, and that is that in both of those programs, the person who participates, the homeowner that's getting the benefit of that program, also has to remove all of their clean sources of water that might feed into the sanitary sewer system. So that is a benefit to the entire public by pulling that clean water out of our sanitary sewer system. So, we do cost share. I think it's appropriate to cost share in some programs. I think the approach that we've taken with overhead and sewer and in the check valve program is a good one to take in this flood-proofing approach as well. So I also just, want to be clear that we have not reached the conclusion of stormwater mitigation in Elmhurst. Following each major storm, we are made aware of new areas of flooding. We hear about projects that have been completed that didn't fully protect as much as we anticipated they might. And then there is also the future possibility that we experience more intense storms than what we've experienced in the past. So for those reasons, I would encourage us to take a more conservative approach with the flood proofing that's being discussed tonight, and require homeowners to participate in the cost to improve their properties. It limits the expectation that the city will bear the full responsibility of flood proofing when overland flooding occurs. So for those with that as the background, I want to propose an amendment. The amendment would require that homeowners who participate share 25% of the cost. We would also, because of that participation, direct financial participation from the homeowner, we would remove the clawback provision, and the third piece of the amendment is changing the budgeted amount, reducing it by 25%. So with that, I'll make a motion to make the changes that are reflected in the piece of paper that everyone should have at their dais. It is in the second to last paragraph, adding one sentence that says, each participating homeowner would be responsible to pay 25% of the total cost for their flood proofing as a cost share. The second change would be to remove the first half of the second to last paragraph, to remove the clawback provision. And the last change would be in the final paragraph to change the budgeted amount from $96,000 to $72,000.
Okay, that's the motion to amend. Do I have a second? Alderman Dunn, a second. So now what we are on is a motion to amend. We'll give you some leeway as far as what we're discussing, because we know that these are going to overlap a little, but we're now talking about the motion to amend the report. So any discussion? Alderman Dunn.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I also want to commend Public Works staff, the committee. This flood-proofing topic has been in discussion for years now, not just a few months. It's been several years, and the hundreds of hours that were put in by staff to really understand the issue, the options, and lay out solid solutions, the many, many hours the committee spent discussing this. I think the report is very good. The methodology, the program that's laid out in the report, the proposed program is very well thought through. And I believe that an initiative where the homeowner is accruing capital improvements, investments into their own home, which is favorable for them, also favorable for their resale value, and it would be appropriate to ask them to have a little skin in the game. So I didn't think 50%, which is a lot of our cost shares are at 50%, sidewalks, rear yard drains, overhead sewers are generally at the 50% range. But I didn't think 0 was the right answer either. So I felt that something more in the middle was appropriate to ensure that there was some qualification of the interest and intent of that homeowner, because I believe that if you're offered something for 100% free, you might not have a great desire to have that, but since it's no cost to yourself, you might agree to have that installed. So I think this small amount, 25%, is a reasonable amount, and I think a percentage is good because some of these projects are more on a home-by-home basis are more expensive than others, especially those with the reverse slope driveways. I think I saw something in the report about $50,000 a home for that, which is quite an investment. So I believe that a cost share is appropriate. I've been supporting floodproofing for years, and at $10,000 a home or thereabouts, you wonder why we didn't do that in more cases, because I think our per home investment in some of these projects far exceeded that. But that's where we are now, and I believe that this is a appropriate way to ensure that we're supporting the residents from a stormwater management standpoint. And I equate this floodproofing compared to these large projects as the large projects would be something like getting a very large tent to protect yourself and your surrounding area, whereas the floodproofing is more giving that person an umbrella, and they get to keep that umbrella, so maybe they should pay for a little bit of that. I also think I appreciate Alderman Deuter's comments on potentially missing some homes in the future in some of these projects. This was an analysis that was done quite a few years ago to target which homes we thought would be impacted, and sometimes they're a little bit off. And so there could be homes creeping in that need this type of improvement. There's also new areas. We're seeing them in the Second Ward in the Growy Woods area, that a large retention project may not be feasible, but a floodproofing methodology would be potentially appropriate solution. So I feel we need to set the right precedents moving forward, because we're not finished with floodproofing here. It's gonna perpetuate itself, and I'm more comfortable moving forward with some type of small cost share. And as outlined in the report, that would amount to 25%. And I agree that removing the clawback is appropriate given the investment of the resident. So with that, I would support the amendment as laid out.
Okay, any further comments? Alderman Toledo.
Thank you. I think we have leeway to speak both about the motion and the report. Yes. Thank you. So I support the report as written. I think the committee's thought process was logical and made sense. It fulfills, this is kind of one of the last projects within the comprehensive stormwater study that the Burke engineers did back in, I think, 2010. And I think the logic follows that we didn't ask for funding, as Alderman Brennan mentioned. We didn't ask for funding for the Golden Meadows project, any of the large infrastructure projects, and just because we can't do an infrastructure project efficiently and cost effectively in these areas doesn't then reverse that logic and says but now they should have to pay to help protect their homes. So I agree with that logic. As it relates to the proposed amendment, I see these as very different than like a check valve or an overhead sewer program. Those are programs, not projects, and those are kind of in place year over year and open, to Alderman Dunn's point, open to people to apply if they think that they meet the criteria. This is a closed project. It's not an open program, and so for that reason as well, I think that the original recommendation makes sense. I will address a little bit on the financing side of this, as that's sort of in my wheelhouse. As is stated in the report, there is not a funding mechanism identified for this $310,000 is what it totals up to between the two reports. And I think the committee and the finance committee could have worked together in a compressed timeline to identify a funding source for this particular thing. But I think it really, this is sort of the tip of the iceberg of a bigger problem that needs to be solved, as we all know, as it relates to our stormwater fund and the future funding of the stormwater fund, our increased pension obligations that continue to put pressure on our budget year over year, and all of those things come in together into, ultimately the decision that we make as a body on what to levy in taxes to the residents every year. And I will address, just since this was brought up during public comments, and just so everyone does know, we do have at this time $136 million in debt service obligation for the city of Elmhurst, all in right now, and that's not issuing any future debt. That'll be an important number to keep in mind when we look at the KEB as well. So, I don't think it would have been prudent to rush to find a funding source for $300,000 right now. I think this project deserves to be supported. I think the responsibility lies with this body, with my committee, with staff, to come forward with a solution, not only for this small component of this stormwater project, but for the bigger picture that I spoke about. And that solution might look like a stormwater fee. That solution might look like an increase in home rule sales tax. That solution might look like some more aggressive cost cutting. Or it might be a combination of those ideas and other ideas that we still haven't brought to the table yet. But it's important that it's thought through, it's well thought out, and also looks to the future and to put ourselves and the city in a good fiscal footing this year and in the future years. So I'll conclude by saying that I do support both of these reports as they're written, and I do look forward to working with the rest of the council and our committee and staff on a comprehensive financial solution in the months ahead. So thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
The proposed improvement project as has been proposed is I definitely do back, and we did have lengthy debate when our council meeting, in our meeting, committee meeting. One thing that I brought up during that meeting was when I moved here in 2002, Elmhurst was an up-and-coming town. And then all of a sudden, 2006, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stormwaters came in. And I knew people that wanted to move to Elmhurst but didn't want to deal with the floods, so they moved elsewhere. and property values during that time frame were affected. And if we continue to, the steps we made to improve that, I think we need to complete that. And this is a project that was outlined back in the initial report, and it's we are there at the very end of this project. So I really strongly would ask you to propose or to support this project as written, and to not support the amendment. And then in future, if we do have other projects that are written, other reports, we can then look at seeing how we can do a cost-sharing program then. But to put this on to the last group of people in this project, I don't feel is right. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Alderman Levin.
I think perhaps more questions, two questions. One is, and I have spoken to a number of the aldermen, including Chairman Kennedy, about this, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. In terms of what we're looking at is our stormwater overview. Is this really the last project, or is it the last project of this nature? So that I want to know where we're going. So next year we can have another project that might be the same nature, so that, as Alderman Cahill says, we'll deal with the same issue in a different way, potentially.
Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Generally speaking, with the completion of Crestview and Brenhaven, that is the first cut of the project. Those are essentially all the projects that got looked at by Christopher Burke, with the exception of those areas on Spring Road, so Spring Road and Adams, that are part of the floodplain. So generally speaking, the bulk of those projects have been taken care of. There are some individual areas. There's Third and Oak. There's some things over, if you mind me looking at my notes, Euclid and McKinley, West and Second. There's a few places that, as we've gone on and learned more about what has happened in individual storms, we've got some pockets that we ultimately need to deal with. The idea of individual home flood proofing will be something that will come up again, because we know of those areas that may be well served with a more economical approach, and there are homes in the Washington, Bryan, Euclid area that did not get helped by the Madison and Washington projects that have been essentially left behind. So as we've looked at as a committee and ultimately as a council, we said we wanted to ultimately help all the homes that had overland flooding. So the short answer is we're not done. We've done a tremendous amount of work, but there's a bit more to do, and it'll ultimately come down to the will of the council and our ability to fund future projects as to how long it takes us before we've essentially declared victory and put all of these homes and issues behind us.
One additional question, Chair. The other question I want, and thank you for that. The other question I had is, we tend to, some issues are problems with a house. If your foundation just leaks and you're not in a flood area, that's obviously not caused by overland flooding. I feel that, or my recollection is that over the past, if water fills up the street or comes up across the sidewalk to a certain point, we declare victory if it's not getting to the house. My concern on part of this is that, and is these, in particular, the flood-proof garage doors. The total between these two projects is about $248,000 according to my math, and on this one it's about $152,000, of which $100,000 is for two garage doors. I know a guy who lives in Arlington that had one of those, and that would be me. And I solved the problem by rebuilding. I know some people over in the 6th Ward, or is that the Jackson School area, that took this on themselves. So isn't this aspect of it really a problem where the water wouldn't come, it's the design of the house, because if the water comes, past the sidewalk, 6 feet, it's filling up the garage well, I'll call it, as opposed to not meeting the standard we have set where it doesn't go all the way up to the house. It's a big ticket amount, and I'm just wondering if there's any consideration that you gave on that.
Alderman Kennedy?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Certainly as we looked at these homes, we are addressing the area where water is against the foundation or against the home and its point of entry. So that's the same, essentially, when we looked at all the other areas, it was those homes, Sailor Swain, Villette, Washington, Pine Street, name them. They all were homes that had water against their foundation. So we're working to remove those. Certainly, looking at those downslope driveways, it's a big ticket item, 50 grand. But if you look at, on all the projects that we've done or plan to do, we have spent up to, over 200, and I think College View will be $235,000 per home that we will spend to address that. If you took all of them together, on average, we will have spent over $100,000 per home. So while this seems very, pointed that we're talking about a couple individual homes that have downslope driveways, in the end, we're talking about a project or two projects where we are definitely on the lower end of what we've spent on a per home basis.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Alderman Honquist.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So my comments on this, I appreciate the conversation, especially given the times we're in and the budget pressure we're under. I do go back to kind of the beginning. We've been working on this for at least 10 years as a community in various councils. I've been involved for now 7.5 years. And a couple of the basic principles that I think we've maintained over time is that the city is culpable for this problem. So it's not simply a set of homeowners or a particular neighborhood. It's a community-wide problem. And there were a lot of people, particularly in the early days, that thought that we should not get involved in this and that people should pay for their own. And we had a lot of debate about that, a lot of philosophical debate about, where does the city, hold a responsibility. And to Alderman Cahill's point and to others, I know as we've discussed that, we discussed and came to the conclusion this is a community problem. And we stepped up in order of the Burke report and of the analysis we did, had our consultant do, to look at these projects. And we stepped up with the lead of Alderman Kennedy and staff and the committees that have been involved with this over time to execute a lot of these projects. And to this conversation, some of those were expensive projects. But the choice otherwise was to allow flooding to be a problem here in Elmhurst and the various neighborhoods we're in. So I think it was the right decision. It was obviously an expensive decision, as we'll see later, and as a community that we are bearing the brunt of paying that debt. But I would also agree that as a community, it was the right thing to do. I don't think there's anything that anyone would argue is worse than having water pour into your house. So we've done this across town. I don't think it's now a point in time where we stop and say, well, yeah, but certain areas of town really should put more in. It'd be like going back and saying, well, let's SSA particular communities because they need to put forward money specific to their solution. And we didn't decide to do that philosophically when we went into this. So I'm for the committee report that was written mainly based on those principles, number one. And number two, I think as we go forward and we find maybe other hot spots or areas, I do agree that this is a precedent. I think it's probably still the right precedent. But it is the council's duty at that time to look at it with staff and decide whether we want to continue to support this. I think particular for this one, this was part of the Burke report, and we're kind of finishing what we started. And I think we need to finish that and move forward. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Alderman Park.
I, too, want to recognize and appreciate the Public Works Committee and the city staff, all your analysis and stuff like this. This is like high-tech things and philosophical things that you're thinking of. But I have to agree also with Alderman Deuter and Alderman Dunn that, this sort of work for improvement on a private residence, I think is appropriate to cost share with the residents themselves. As Alderman Dunn pointed out, it's almost like a little umbrella instead of something, it's not helping the public overall. There's no greater capacity for our infrastructure systems to be, processing the water or anything like that. So I think, a minimal buy-in or investment in someone's home and to be helped with the relief is, is very appropriate, and I think people will still be very appreciative of the idea. And then in terms of talking about how this is, like Alderman Honka says, a community problem, and it's evolved over the last, since we've done the work study. So to say that this would be the last project, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if we, seal off these points of entry. Will the water not go in window wells or go into other neighbors' window wells or something like this? I don't know if sealing off the points of entry, it's almost like sticking a finger in the bust in the dam, it seems like. I don't know. And, I think because it is a community problem, I would like to offer something like this as a program rather than projects that were, they were initially mapped out as that, but we didn't know what we didn't know back in 2012, and I think we've learned a lot. Like, look at our Sailor Swain project. We didn't think that was going to be feasible for a long time, and because the technology for the development of the infrastructure work that we could do improved tremendously, we were able to put something in much better than we ever could have originally. And I just think maybe too much time has passed to say that this is the only thing that can be done. And as we've seen it change around town, that this could be something where it could benefit a lot of people who want to invest in their homes. And I think it would be fair and equitable to offer that to more than just these little pockets. And if we're going to do that, that if it's going to be, offered out there, we have to, have it well defined about what criteria to do and, what kind of cost sharing we would do and such like that. Because my garage floods too, and my house doesn't, but I would like a $50,000 garage door. I have had to throw away building materials that we were going to use. So, and to Alderman Levy's point about, and my garage is not low, it's not going down. And so if the water is just going at a normal area, but because it goes down into a slope, I too agree that that is a design flaw that needs to be addressed in a different way. That is not part of, I think, the city's handling of this problem. And I think that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Any additional comments? Alderman Bryan.
Excuse me. Thank you. As I sit here and listen, I've gone back and forth on what I think is the right decision to make of should there be any type of funding from the residents, should it be solely paid for by the city of Elmhurst? And the third option that hasn't been mentioned, which I will mention now, is should this be done at all? Multiple aldermen have stated that this conversation has been going on. Flooding discussion has been going on for somewhere around 10 years. This conversation about floodproofing has gone on definitely more than months, probably even closing in on a couple of years, if not more. I, as well as Alderman Deuter has stated, have been previously on the Public Works Committee, and I've had heard a lot of discussion by my fellow committee members about this topic, as well as my personal view, which I will share now. When we were discussing it on the committee, we were discussing it as per a policy, not a project, not a program, but policy. Should we do this overall? Multiple aldermen have already stated, I believe Alderman Honquist was one of them. Well, he said culpable, but what about the liability factor if we went forward with something like this? Where is it with the city? Because we're paying 100% for quote-unquote flood-proofing of a home. As I believe Alderman Park said, water will continue to move, maybe go to the neighbor's house, maybe it will find another entry point in that house. So where's our liability if we say that we're paying for all these quote-unquote, which I don't buy it, that they're improvements, but these improvements, and then these improvements fail, and then these residents still have issues and still have damage to their house and belongings. That's why I think when we were formerly, I was part of the committee, but when the committee was discussing it as a policy, that was the right direction to go. Talk about policy. Should we do this to start with? Alderman Levin made comments similar to that as well, about are there going to be any more projects? So are we going to do this decision making on a case-by-case basis? And then what is the liability of one quote-unquote project to another? How are we making that decision? That's what the purpose of a policy is, to come across, hit all of these points. Liability, who's culpable, what type of floodproofing improvements should be done, what should be the cost share, if any. All of that should be wrapped up in a policy, not as presented as a project, not presented as a program necessarily. Once the policy is established, then you can make a decision on that next level. So I don't feel like we're on either the amendment or the report itself is going in the right direction, because like I said as my initial comments, I've been ping-ponging back and forth. What should be done? Should we cost share? Should we not cost share? And the reason why I am ping-ponging back and forth, because we should have that wrapped up in a policy. All those decisions are made. We decide on what that policy looks like. Then what areas it applies to, it's a no-brainer. If additional projects or programs come about, we already know what we should be doing from the policy that we all put in place. So I think that's one very important thing that hasn't been discussed that should be discussed. Now, if I put that aside and go to the next point. The next point is about cost sharing. There's been made mention of, well, I don't know if the terminology of share or reduce costs, but essentially not spend as much if we do this, or per home, it would be a lower cost if we do this for these two areas versus what we've done in the past. Alderman Kennedy made mention of College View being approximately $235,000 per home, cost per home. Well, why all of a sudden these two areas, and I'll say it with strong language, is why we shortchanging them and saying, well, now we need to find the cheapest cost per home. Why now? Why is this? There are alternatives for both of these areas. It's been discussed with the Park District. Now, the Park District didn't accept the initial proposal, but there's other alternatives. I spoke with many Park Board members about this, and they didn't shut the door and say, no way, you're not touching our property. They did shut the door and say, what you initially proposed, we aren't on board with. There's, on the Crestview area, on that intersection, I wouldn't call it a T intersection, but instead of a cul-de-sac, it looks like a T. Right there, we can utilize partially storm trap under that public right-of-way, and then a lesser amount in the park, and that's a possible solution. Has it been presented? Not that I'm aware of. But why not do the right thing? Why not take it to the full effect compared to something what I deem to be as a huge, huge liability risk? And that liability risk is, well, we're floodproofing today, but tomorrow they get water. Then who's at fault for that? And did we essentially waste city dollars to floodproof something that ultimately wasn't floodproofed at all or not fully? Alderman Dunn made a point in regards to capital improvements to a personal home. And I had, and my fellow former committee members could vouch for this, I have discussed this, that this type of a situation where the city pays 100% for a private residence. It has been discussed by city staff and some aldermen that the reason why we do some of these other programs, the reason why we do some of these other projects is because there's more than a private residence benefit. This would essentially be a private residence benefit. Now, I wouldn't go as far as saying it's a capital improvement to the home, because as multiple aldermen here tonight have said and previously have said, that we're not doing our jobs. And I say that as everybody. And I know it's hard to do, and we've done a great job. We, being staff and the elected, have done a great job to date. But essentially, we're not keeping stormwater in the right of way that we need to do. And that's the ultimate goal. Here, by doing either of these proposals, we're saying, we're going to forgo keeping it in the right-of-way, and we're just going to throw some improvements because it's a cheaper alternative. And again, that's my perspective on it. But I think we're skipping over the policy, and that's a huge damage, or the wrong way to go. I think that by doing any type of flood-proofing, you're just going to eventually cause issues with the foundation. Hydrostatic pressure is going to get the best of any home, any garage, any type of structure, and eventually find its way in. Parks, again, I will say, are on board. Maybe not to the extent that we would like, but I believe there are other solutions, including home purchases as well. I think flood-proofing is a false sense of security to the homeowner and, quite frankly, to all of us because of what I've already mentioned. In regards to the dollars, back to the dollars and cents, we have spent 30% more on some of these projects in other areas of town to do underground storage. And here we're saying, let's find that cheapest route. And let's, even on top of that, call it a project and say, we're done with these two areas because we did all we can do. I don't think that's right, and I don't think that's actually accurate either. So for that matter, I'd like to look at this in comparison to the Webster project. The Webster project initially was said, and I don't know what the ultimate number of homes it was to improve upon, was done, a detention area was done and created for 1 or 2 homes. And here Alderman Kennedy made mention that there would be what believes to be 8 out of the 15 initial homes that we're seeing overland stormwater would be helped. So I think that that's an issue, that if we're doing it in one part of town, we need to be consistent in other parts of town. I don't think we should make any decision on stormwater, especially solely on cost, and I think that's what the majority of the discussion has been tonight. And let's find out on how we can achieve some level of improvement, but also putting a higher emphasis than I believe we have in the past on cost. So with all of that, I will not be able to support either the majority or minority report. But lastly, I'll say I appreciate the discussion, because I did have a discussion with Alderman Deuter prior to this meeting, and I told her that I was on the fence. I don't know on which way I was going to go. And quite frankly, until this discussion, there was many points made, and the biggest one being program versus projects. Until that actually started happening, I really had no idea on what my decision was. So I want to thank all the very good debate on this issue.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Number of, great discussion, number of points that I just wanted to touch on. When we started off with stormwater, we said we were going to try and do the most amount of good for the most amount of people in the shortest amount of time at the least possible cost. And that's what we've said since day one. So cost has been part of this from the very, very beginning. Comments made about the Park District and whether they'd be open to it. If Mayor Morley was here, he would tell you that door has been shut. And you can shake your head all you want, but it has been shut. It's been mentioned numerous times that they're done doing projects, doing anything in their parks that would have anything for stormwater. So we can indeed agree to disagree. The reality is they don't want to do any more projects. When we talk about the data that went into this, there was a comment made about this was data from a long time ago. That's not accurate. We went back out to all of these homes over the last 3 to 4 months to verify exactly if they had overland flooding issues. So this is recent data. All of these homes have been verified, and that's what went into the body of the report. In terms of making an improvement that has a direct effect on the home's value, well, that's everything we've done in stormwater, right? When we made improvements to Washington Street, that had a direct effect on the value of those homes because now they don't flood. When we did that are doing that in Sailor, Swain, Villette, it will have an effect. When we did that on Washington and on Pine, it had an effect, right? So if we're not comfortable with putting money to having a benefit to an individual homeowner, then that train left the station 10 years ago, and we should have thought about that way back then. In terms of the program versus a project, this started as a project, and we are looking to finish it as a project. If there is a desire to have a program around assisting homeowners that have flooding, well, you have to remember that's not flooding related to water that wasn't kept in the right-of-way. That's because of issues with their individual home, and that's not something we've dealt with. So if there's a desire for individuals to put that forth as a referral, go for it. But that's not something that we have focused on as it relates to stormwater mitigation in the past. When the question came about of liability, just as we've done in other programs, what we've done with overhead sewers and the like, that situation ultimately becomes a relationship between the homeowner and the service provider with oversight and cost and sharing or direct payment by the city. So ultimately, it will be the homeowner and the XYZ company, whoever that is, will come together, they'll form a contract, and they will execute the project. We will be there just to provide them the funds on an approved project, and we are out of the deal. Ultimately, it's between those two parties to work that out. As we look at some of the other things related to, cost sharing, there's really 3 programs that have cost sharing. They're the overhead sewer program, that's a 50/50 up to $5,000. There's a sanitary laterals, that's also 50/50 up to $2,000. And rear yard drainage, which is $1,000 plus the engineering oversight. For the most part, the city gets no benefit from those. As it relates to overhead sewers, that started back after the flood of '87 when we had illegally connected sump pumps. So yes, we do require the people to take out the clean water sources, but they never should have been there in the first place. So we help them out. As we talk about other areas where we have done, a significant amount of city involvement, remember back as part of the program in recent years to eliminate illegally connected sump pumps in the south end of Elmhurst. We as a council made a decision to 100% fund that for all the homeowners. To date, we've spent over $500,000 and helped, I think the number is 254 homes. So we have a history of doing these types of things at 100%, and definitely there's a benefit to the homeowner, but there is a benefit to the city in doing all those things. So I know there was a comment about, having skin in the game. If you lived in this town long enough and you had flooding, you've got skin in the game because you've cleaned your basement enough times that you don't care to ever happen again. So I believe this goes forward at 100%. It makes the most amount of sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last-minute comments? Okay, seeing none, we're going to call the roll on the amendment to the report. City Clerk, can you, before we do that, just so that everybody knows, could you read the amendment, just the additional components?
Okay, so we're adding in for the motion change, each participating homeowner would be responsible to pay 25% of the total cost for their floodproofing as a cost share. And then down at that last paragraph, the budget change from $96,000 would be $72,000.
Okay.
We're striking at the very top, the homes down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to pay back. That whole first part of that paragraph is striked.
Okay, thank you. We're going to call the roll on the amendment. Remember, this is for the amendment.
Park? Aye. Levin? No. Kennedy?
No.
Honquist?
No.
Brennan?
No.
Mulliner?
No.
Deuter?
Aye.
Barimus?
Aye.
Dunn?
Aye.
Bram?
No.
Palumski?
No.
Cahill?
No.
Toludo?
No.
Okay, I've got 4 ayes, 9 nays, 1 vacant.
Four yeas, 9 nays, 1 vacant. The amendment fails. So we'll go on to the main report. Any last-minute comments on the main report? Alderman Brown?
Oh, I thought you said Alderman Brennan, sorry. You shouldn't sit us next to each other. Yeah, I just want to say two last comments on this. I do think liability is a big issue. I think policy is the right way to go. As I stated already, that's why I cannot support either report. I don't think procedurally this is the right way to go. I think this is, quite frankly, being miscategorized as a project. Liability is huge, and I know there's been statements this evening that of what the Park District said. We can speculate all night on what has been said. I can just say what I have been told by Park Board members, and I have been told that they are willing to work with us, just not what was put forth. So for an individual to tell another individual what they heard was not accurate, I think is a fallacy. So I hope that everybody really takes this into consideration, that we are setting a precedent here, that this should be policy, not labeled as a project.
Thank you. Alderman Dunn?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, I thought the effort leading up to this report was excellent. And in my opinion, the proposal is 98% of the way there. I would prefer a cost share in this situation, but I can appreciate the will of the council. And on this particular issue, I view this as a project, and moving forward, I would strongly suggest that there would be a cost share element if something was a program that was moving citywide to help out homeowners on a resident by resident basis. Thanks.
Thank you. Any last minute comments? Seeing none, we'll call the roll on 6.1.
Park? Levin?
Aye.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Honquist?
Aye.
Brennan?
Aye.
Mulliner?
Aye.
Deuter?
No.
Paramus?
No.
Sorry, Dunn?
Aye.
Bram?
No.
Palumsky?
Aye.
Cahill?
Aye.
Toludo?
Aye.
9 ayes, 4 nays, 1 vacancy.
9 ayes, 4 nays, 1 vacancy. 6.1 passes. On to 6.2, could you read the recommendation paragraph, please?
It is therefore the recommendation of the Public Works and Buildings Committee that the City Council budget $152,400 with an appropriate funding source for individual home floodproofing in the Brinhaven subdivision neighborhood in the budget years that funds are made available, and that staff be authorized to approve property floodproofing improvements for reimbursement. Signed, Jim Kennedy, Chair, Mike Brennan, Vice Chair, and Alderman Brian Cahill.
Thank you. I need a motion. Alderman Kennedy, second. Alderman Brennan. Any discussion? Alderman Kennedy?
No further comment unless others do. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor.
Any other comments? Similar situation to the last one. Alderman Deuter.
Thank you. I won't move the amendment that would mirror what we just discussed and that did not pass, but for the same reasons discussed on the last report, and also pointing out this area is the area that has the 2 downslope driveways specifically, and I think that's an improvement that, for the city paying up to $50,000 per home for what I think could be considered a design flaw. In other cases, we are taking that water, it can go halfway up the yard, and that's still been deemed as, a success for the projects in other areas. In the case of a downslope driveway, you're halfway up the yard, that water's pouring down the driveway. So I think there's a design issue. I think the cost to alleviate it is exceptionally high. So for those reasons, I won't support this report.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Seeing none, we'll call the roll.
Park? No. Levin?
Aye.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Conquest?
Aye.
Brennan?
Aye.
Mulliner?
Aye.
Deuter?
No.
Karimis?
No.
Dunn?
Aye.
Graham?
No.
Palumski?
Aye.
Cahill?
Aye.
Toledo?
Aye.
9 ayes, 4 nays, 1 vacancy.
9 ayes, 4 nays, 1 vacancy. That report passes. So we're done with committee reports. We'll move on to reports and recommendations. In the absence of Mayor Morley, just a couple of quick comments. The first one is that, just a reminder to everybody in the public that the second ward has a vacancy currently, and the mayor is currently accepting applications for that vacancy. So if you're interested, please contact the city, and they'll get you the appropriate information. And a follow-up on the census, just to remind everybody, the deadline is drawing closer. The more people we get to complete that census, the better off we're going to be as a city as far as recouping funds from different funding sources. So just please, if you have not completed the census, move forward and complete that census. City Manager?
Thank you. I have 2 items before we get to the capital expenditure budget. One is an email that you should have received today from Emily Egan, one of our planners, reminding everybody about the Elmhurst Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. That is winding down, but we're still interested in getting input from the residents as far as priority goes, and so we've started a little contest where if people submit a photo and tell us why that improvement matters to them, they will be eligible to be selected randomly, random draw, to win a City Center gift card. So if you could please put that out on your social media, we would appreciate that. Second item is an update on Halloween. I'm sure that you've been getting plenty of calls about that, as we have here at City Hall. We have been talking with other communities to see what plans might be in store for them, and we heard today that the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, DCEO, with the state, will be coming out with guidelines in short order. I don't know that any community has prohibited trick-or-treating. I think that would be darn near impossible. And so I think the best that we can do is come up with some guidelines for people on how to safely trick-or-treat. And so that's what we're looking forward to receiving from DCEO. And once we receive those, we will disseminate them to the community and, of course, the City Council as well. If you have any ideas, thoughts on what we can do, I believe Alderman Levin might, please share them.
Alderman Levin?
I think the trick-or-treaters should wear a mask. Well, that's what they do in Halloween.
Thank you. I appreciate that input.
Okay, before we go on to the budget, just any other reports from any other elected officials? Does anybody have anything else? Seeing none, City Manager is going to present the overview of the capital expenditure budget. As you all know, most of you have been through this process before. This is a process where it's an overview of the budget and what our priorities are for next year. This is helpful for everybody who's here, as well as the public, to understand what our focus is down the road. We will dig in deeper to each one of these individual items at committee level. So we're going to begin with this overview, and I'm going to turn it over to the City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Before we get started, I want to say thanks to the staff in the Finance Department especially, Tom Trozine, Lori Hayes, Matt, all the department directors. You can find information on the capital expenditure budget in 2 locations. We did put tonight's PowerPoint presentation on board docs, and you can also access the entire budget through the website. And Tom's staff has really taken it up a notch this year. If you go to the table of contents, it is indexed so that if you click on an item, it will get right to the page. So thank you, Tom, whoever in your department came up with that. Wave your hand, Tom. I know you're back there. Thank you, sir. So as Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, this is the first part of the budget. I sent a letter out to the council on September 14th, which outlined the KEB, the capital expenditure budget. But what's on the screen now is our budget schedule. We started back in June with assembling the 5-year capital expenditure budget, worked through with staff on a number of different meetings, and we are at the overview of the 5-year capital expenditure budget, and we'll get to the rest of the budget as we move forward. So, for those who haven't been through this before, the capital expenditure budget objective is to identify and create a comprehensive plan for the long-range major capital expenditures necessary to maintain or develop physical assets of the city. And we categorize those as expenditures of $25,000 or more and intended to be held or used for a period of 10 years or more. We further classify the expenditures by essential to maintain current service level down to contribute to the economic development of the city. You can read the ones in between in the budget. And we further prioritize them by essential and with immediate need, essential but can be delayed, optional but beneficial to the city through increased productivity or safety, and optional but beneficial to the city in a social, cultural, or aesthetic way. Now, on to the numbers. So these are the expenditures by priority and by year going out the 5 years. As you can see, the overall budget is down from last year's, as I pointed out in my memo. And that is due to either completion of projects, reprioritizing the projects, or some other method to try to reduce that number from last year. A good example is we had talked for a number of years about the police station and what's needed there. It's still needed. However, understanding the current economic circumstances, this might not be the right time to do that. We still have some conversations to be had at the Public Affairs and Safety Committee regarding that, but we did push that out a little bit longer just to see where things go and when might be the right opportunity timing-wise for our community on that. So going to the next slide, you can see the breakdown of the expenditures. So that's $243 million and a little bit more. It's down roughly 24 million from 2020. And you can see the different breakout that we have. Obviously, the biggest chunk is general fund on the right side of that, and we further break that down in the rectangles to the right. And then the municipal utility fund on the upper left portion of that pie chart is the next largest. Turning to the revenues or funding sources for that, the biggest portion of that would be GO bonds or IEPA loans, dependent on the improvement. The municipal utility fund, of course, we look at user fees for that, and then we have different breakouts of the remainder of the funding sources. Turning specifically to revenue sources on the CIF, or the Capital Improvement Fund, we take that from 80% of the state income tax that we receive, which is per capita basis, a 1/4% home rule sales tax, we take 33% of that, 25% of the telecommunications tax we receive, the rental income from the 180 West Park building, any SSA payments that we receive for new sidewalks, and interest income and grants. Now, getting specifically into some of the capital projects, and as Mayor Pro Tem said, typically we further discuss those in detail at committees, or if there are specific questions, certainly you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to meet with anybody to discuss that. Some of our conversation tonight has focused on stormwater and flood mitigation. In the next year, we have, or in the KEB, we have proposed $9.3 million in stormwater and flood mitigation, and also an additional $54 million in facility and public works infrastructure improvements, and that's citywide. That is pipes and plants and pump stations and everything related to that. And then below that, we have the IEPA loans for capital projects. That's specifically for water, sewer, or the wastewater treatment plant. Further on that page, Tom, if you can go back one, you can see at the bottom, we did note the GO bonds that we had done over years past for stormwater or municipal utility funds. Current and proposed GO bonds for stormwater projects. We have miscellaneous stormwater improvements at $5 million, and then specifically in 2019, we issued bonds for the College View and Jackson School improvements projects at $4.3 million. Under that, we have proposed GO bonds for capital projects, and we talked about this in great detail last year, that eventually Fire Station 1 will need to be replaced. The police station needs an addition or replacement. The Public Works garage has some improvements that need to be made. We have some stormwater stations that need rehabilitation. And then the Route 83 pedestrian bridge is in there as that's the GO bond of what that project would be because we anticipate some grants for that eventually to come out. Expenditures funded by the Capital Improvement Fund include stormwater management, infrastructure improvements such as streets and sidewalks, public safety building improvements we just talked about, public works maintenance garage, parking improvements, fire equipment, IT, and some debt service. Specifically, moving on to the annual street resurfacing program. If you recall, this year, due to budget issues, we canceled actually all of the repaving projects. We're just doing some patching. And so what we've done is we want to make that up, but we don't want to do it all in one year. So what we've tried to do is spread that out over a number of years, either by pushing this year's projects into next year and the year after, and then taking next year's and continuing to spread those out so that it's not one big hit in any particular year. So as you can see, starting in 2021, we were budgeting $3 million for resurfacing, and then increasing that to 2024 to make up for this year's, and then dropping back down to $3 million in 2025. Other specific street resurfacing projects include the First Street and Park Avenue bridges. It's been 20 years, maybe 30 years, I believe 20 since we've repaved anything on there. In talking to our city engineer and our street department, we need to do the work on these sooner than later, because if we delay that, it could cost more as the bridge starts to deteriorate. So we are proposing some improvements to that over the 5-year program, hoping to break those down. Also looking for grant dollars for that. The Brush Hill from Euclid to Commonwealth is one of the projects, and we have some MFT dollars reserved for that in 2022. Next slide shows reconstruction of Van Buren for a 4-block portion from Spring to the west end, and also Crescent from Poplar to the east end. And if you have driven down Crescent this year, you know we replaced some water main in that area, and so the street work typically follows that as funding allows. Additional improvements that we're looking at is improvements to Villa Avenue. We share that road with Villa Park, and Villa Park is going to be the lead on that project, and they've asked us to pay our share on the east half of that. So that's from St. Charles to the railroad tracks. And the Butterfield York intersection improvements. This is a project that has been kind of hanging out there since the hospital was built. There were 3 intersections that were identified that were going to need to be improved. This is the last intersection, and so we have some funds hanging out there for this. I believe this is an IDOT project with our share into it, and so we'll be using some MFT dollars as well. Turning next to storm station rehab projects. This is something that we've been talking quite a bit about with the Public Works staff. Paul Burris is involved with this as
His division maintains the stormwater pump stations, and these are the stations that are on the west side of the city that where the water flows, and in high rain periods will then pump water over the berm into the creek. So God bless you. While these aren't used all the time, they're vital to our stormwater infrastructure. And so we've tried to schedule them out to try to smooth that. And it is pump improvements, it is some piping improvements, and in some cases it's location improvements, because where they're located, water gets deep enough that our staff cannot enter the stormwater station. So we need to move that further east so that our crews can get to them and maintain them in storm situations. The next slide details our city parking lot resurfacing program. As the council knows, before we resurface any city parking lot, we look to see if there's any stormwater improvements that can be made as well. However, the numbers reflected here are only for resurfacing, not necessarily for any stormwater improvements. On the right side of that slide, you'll see improvements for IT. The first one, IT hardware, software, and miscellaneous, includes, and you would see in years out, includes extra funding for our finance software as we look at upgrading or replacing that. It's something we've talked about, I think, every year. And so we've been able to get along without replacing it, but we need to give some serious consideration to that as things progress through that. And then below that, our typical network and PC, other software improvements. The next slide looks at, gets into the municipal utility fund projects for the next 5 years and the IEPA loans that are associated with it. You'll see the first project, North Digester Cover and Building, that is in 2 because we're breaking that project up. As I say every year, the wastewater treatment plant is our biggest asset, but it certainly needs updating constantly and improvements. One of the improvements that's in that list, the phosphorus improvement, is a mandate from the IEPA. We have been putting that off, or been able to put that off, because of our involvement in the Salt Creek work group. The IEPA, as we applied for our last permit renewal, indicated to us that we need to start thinking about the phosphorus improvements, phosphorus removal improvements, and that is a huge dollar amount for us to absorb. We continue to talk to the IEPA to see if there's anything else that we can do to avoid installing that, but they have indicated that long-term, 2025, we are going to have to look at making that improvement. Next is the Municipal Utility Fund water side. This year, we trimmed down our water main improvement program due to funding. Obviously, like the roadways, though, that's something that we need to continue to work on. And so, again, we're trying to spread that into future years. And so this budget is certainly fluid as we go, no pun intended, but we will continue to work on water main improvements annually. And also our water pumping stations. We're part of the DuPage Water Commission, which is a group that feeds water to almost the entire county, every municipality. And while we do get water from them, it's up to us to distribute that water to all of our customers, and so we need to maintain that. Next, which is something I already mentioned, the wastewater treatment plant. You'll see a better breakdown of improvements through the 5 years in the chart on top. But also, just like water, we have the collection system on the sanitary side. And so we need to continue maintaining that, lining it, cleaning it out. We've put quite a bit of effort into that, cleaning it out, and along with our storm sewers over the last few years, and that has really improved the system. But you can see the various improvement projects that are scheduled on that sheet as well. Next, the parking system fund, and this is where we talk about our parking deck maintenance along with resurfacing program. Other improvements that we're looking to make are additional electric charging stations at the decks, and we're hoping to get some grants for those. We recently installed a parking garage counter system at the garage on First Street. We were going to look at one for the Addison deck, but I think we're going to put that off for a little bit. Parking counts are down right now if you don't go into the garage very often, and so it may be a little bit of time until those come back, and we need to install those. We got great feedback on the Larch deck on First Street, though, when we did put that in. Below that, stormwater management and flood mitigation, which we've had quite a bit of discussion on tonight. The pending projects include College View and Jackson improvements, and then also Arlington Reservoir. We approved something tonight on design of that. That is the facility out on County Line Road that we own. And then we looked at the Brynhaven and Crestview tonight. You'll see the asterisk for Brynhaven. That was the initial cost estimate. The report said otherwise. We will look to see when we get to the operating budget whether or not that can be included. Next are the tax increment financing funds. We have a number of projects planned for that. The downtown TIF, the streetscape and facade, as I mentioned, some charging stations, and then the Metro Station improvement, which is moving forward. We have a large resurfacing project, North York Street from Crestview to Grand, that we'll use some TIF dollars on to match our grant dollars. Sidewalk improvements on North York, that again we'll be using TIF dollars to match to our grant. And then some lift station force main replacements in TIF 4 and 5 that we are looking to schedule. I mentioned it just now, but the Metro Station upgrade project has been kicked off. The Architecture and Building Commission met with our project engineer and architect about a month ago to start that process. We'll be getting a lot of public input on that. The cost estimate right now is $27 million, but when final design comes in, we'll know best what that's going to be. We still have $22.4 million in grants sitting there, and so the match of the $4.6 million can come from TIF or possibly a GO bond as we move forward on that. So that is a 30,000-foot view of what we're looking at with our KEB. We take that and we take the capital and roll it into the 2-year operating for those 2 years out. And as Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, and I did, we go through some of the details of those projects at committee reviews, and Finance Committee takes a look at the review of the revenues. In the meantime, the department directors and budget team will review all the department budgets and put together the operating budget for the City Council review. We anticipate getting that to the council October 19th and start the review after that and roll through until we're done and approve the budget in December. That's my presentation. We're happy to answer any questions tonight, or if you think of it later, feel free to contact us.
Alderman Polonsky.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I have a question about any of the items that were moved from priority A to B. If I'm comparing this to, let's say, the water reclamation facility lab, was that always going to be a priority B? Because it has funding this year attached to it. I'm curious, anything that is moved from A to B, let's say police and fire, it looks like the funding begins to be allocated for the fire department in 2022 and for the police department, for the fire department, and then 2023 for the police department. By changing the priority, did that just take the, earmarked funds and just move them up or, forward a year or two? Or how do we see the change here other than it being classified as B? How did we see the redistribution of funds?
I don't know if I'd categorize it as redistribution of
Okay,
funds.
so it's-
Reprioritize the project is
Okay, so the
what I
funds are
understand it.
still allocated the way they were last year. So meaning planning down the road, the amount of money that was essentially budgeted per year hasn't changed. It hasn't been pushed off. It's just essentially when we decide to take on these projects, it's a lower level of priority.
Yes, and when you ask if the money was rebudgeted, there's no money for it right now. It would be a GO bond, and so it's a matter of when we want to go out for the GO bond.
Okay.
Once we know that.
Okay. Thanks.
Any additional questions? Alderman Levin.
I'm going to send some over on specific items, but one thing that stuck out last year and again this year, and it's just sort of a philosophical question. If our capital budget is $25,000 or more with an impact for 10 years, our whole IT budget is really, I mean, we don't use PCs, printers, software, all the things that are in our IT budget really don't seem to be capital. I just wonder if they should be moved into the operating budget at some point, or if there's a reason why we would leave them in capital.
So some of the items in there do meet that guideline of 25,000 or more and 10 years. We've been on it with our finance software for at least 10 years.
We've been
as an
planning for
example.
10 years. We've been planning, oh, I see what you mean.
And we've been planning to replace it for 10 years. But certainly, we've had it for longer than that. I don't have the breakdown in front of me as exactly what that is, but I'm happy to get you that answer, Alderman, as far as when we get into the operating and where it belongs.
Okay, I mean, it's just an
I
idea that
understand
maybe-
your question.
All right.
Any additional questions? Alderman Toledo.
Thank you. I have a kind of a high-level question on the schedule. You didn't show on the presentation, City Manager, but was included in the written book. It was the last page, I guess it's page 24. It is numbered. It's the page right before you start getting into the detailed sheets, and there is a table in that, which is the funding source by year for the 5-year capital expenditure program. And in that, the biggest line item that totals up over the course of the 5 years is obviously the funding source that is currently, planned to be GO bonds / IEPA loans. I guess my question is, does staff, through the process of contemplating a 5-year CUB and putting these things, I understand that staff contemplates where the funding, the funding source is going to come from, and you earmark it into a GO bond or an IEPA loan. Obviously, the way that we're funding IEPA loans is through fees.
Water and sewer fees.
What is staff's contemplation of how we would pay for these GO bonds at these levels for the balance of that? I think it's about a 50-50 split of the $109 million over the course of 5 years. Is the city just assuming that we're going to increase tax levy to do that and not abate? Is that contemplated at all?
It's not contemplated, only that we want to make sure that these projects, these capital improvements are on the radar for that 5 years. And we don't want to show expenditures without some sort of revenue. We want to show a balanced budget, even in the CAB. And so we plug in GO bonds, understanding that we will need a revenue source to pay the debt on that.
Thank you. And, I will say, for, just to, I guess, highlight, one of the things, there was a member of the public that was here speaking about debt earlier tonight, and, I think, that comment can imply that all debt is bad, and not all debt is bad. We, as a city, we have to issue debt, we have to take care of maintenance and capital projects, and, but I will say that, the Finance Committee did have an opportunity to look at our debt burden, and how that plays out over the next 20 years, a couple of meetings ago. And 2021, 2022, and 2023 are the highest burden for our current debt service. We're in the tune of about $10 million a year for debt service in those 3 years. So I guess as I'm thinking through and committees are reviewing their components of this budget, of this KEB in the next couple of committee meetings, I would ask, and I think staff made an attempt, and I appreciate staff's attempt to reduce the total of the KEB, but I think timing matters too. I think we can begin to afford more debt in 2024 and on than we can as easily afford in 2021, 2022, and 23. And then so I just wanted to kind of have that in people's heads. And then, my last kind of philosophical statement that I'll make tonight, and this is an offer to all of the committees, is, I think one of the shortcomings of our committee structure is that we fundamentally have, especially with Public Works Committee, we fundamentally have one committee that is approving spending, large capital expenditures, and we have a completely other committee that, even on city manager's schedule of what comes next, we have a completely different committee, the Finance Committee, that is supposed to find the revenue. And, in a normal private entity, a non-public entity, the people that are spending and the people that are finding the money, they're at the same table, and they're having dialogue at the same time together about this project is important, here's how we might pay for it. And, our committee structure doesn't really promote that sort of a dialogue and discourse. And so I'll offer myself, if anyone on a committee is going through this process, I would love to talk to you about your thoughts on a certain project and its priority and the big picture, how we might be able to fund it, how we might be able to time it. I know staff is looking at that, and staff is obviously there as a resource too, but I'd like to try to help break down some of those structural barriers to having some of those conversations, and I'm happy to take anyone's calls or emails to that effect. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? Alderman Brennan?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So, City Manager, just curious, and you may have covered this and I may have missed it, but as far as revenue modeling for 2021, is there an assumption as it relates to, how we rebound? I mean, is it still, we're still down next year? When do we anticipate getting back to normalcy, if you will?
That is more of an operating budget conversation. So I don't, Tom and I have talked about it, all the staff, we've talked about that, looking at what our revenues are now versus what they projected to be, what they were last year. And so we'll continue to work on that, and we hope to provide that for you when we present in October on the operating budget.
That sounds good, thank you. And then, as it relates to a debt policy, as we go through the process, the next upcoming months, I'm very interested with respect to where we are relative to that policy.
I'm sorry, I was distracted. Can you repeat that, Alderman?
So as we go through the process of approving budgets, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, we passed a debt policy.
Mm-hmm.
And just relative to what we have in front of us, I'm just very interested to understand, where we are relative to that policy.
Where we are right now?
In the future.
Okay.
I mean, as we go through the process, that's something that I would like to, maybe not review the policy, but make sure everybody understands it and where we are relative to that policy with our assumptions and budget.
Got it.
Any other questions? Anyone else?
Just one minor comment, specifically to Alderman Brennan and anyone else who has that question. The Finance Committee did do a review of our debt policy and our current debt outstanding on August 24th, so just last month. There's lots of schedules in our agenda on board docs, and so that was updated relatively recently. If you would like to take a look at that, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Dunn.
Just to follow up to the idea that Alderman Brennan was talking about, the trying to get back to normal. I think I understand the operating budget was, we took a haircut there, and we don't know when we'll get back. But I think in terms of capital, we did defer some things, like you mentioned paving and vehicle purchases. So there are some aspects of the capital budget that I think were cut in 2020 that we'll need to make up. I don't know if there was anything in MUF that was tabled or delayed, since that's self-funding, but I think there is some, because I saw on the paving, we were at $7 million next year, and I think it's supposed to be about 3.5 every year.
We did defer some water main work this year, and I believe a little bit of sewer improvements, just to help keep that budget down, not knowing where revenues were going to be.
Mm-hmm. So there's some catch-up there.
Yeah.
Any last minute questions? Okay, seeing none. Let's keep in mind that beginning in October, we're going to be pretty focused on budget. We will begin probably late October having committee of the whole meetings to discuss the operating budget, and then we'll do that through the final part of the year to get that completed. If you have questions, either call the city manager, call Tom Trozine, or contact, the Finance Committee is always here as assistance, and keep in mind, all of these items will be discussed in detail in committees, in the appropriate committee. So just so we have that in mind. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to ordinances. We have one ordinance to pass this evening. This relates back to an item that's on the consent agenda, and it was asked to suspend the rules on that particular one. So, Clerk Tamer, would you please read the title of this ordinance?
An ordinance amending section 24.05 entitled Additions, Insertions, Deletions, and Changes to Adopted Codes of Article 1 entitled General Provisions of Chapter 24 entitled Building Code of the Elmhurst Municipal Code. See item 5.16.
Okay, I need a motion to approve this. Alderman Kennedy. I need a second. Alderman Brennan. Any comments, any discussion? Seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Park. Aye. Levin.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Honquist.
Aye.
Brennan.
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
Deuter.
Aye.
Remus.
Aye.
Dunn.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Palumski.
Aye.
Aye.
Cahill. Toledo.
Aye.
13 ayes, 0 nays, one vacancy.
13 ayes, 0 nays, and 1 vacancy. That item passes. Now on to other business. Does anyone have any other business that they'd like to talk about? Seeing none, I need a motion to adjourn. Alderman Kennedy, Alderman Deuter, seconds. Roll call, please.
Park. Aye. Levin.
We've been doing it.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Honquist.
Aye.
Brennan.
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
Deuter.
Aye.
Remus. Aye. Dunn.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Palumski.
Aye.
Cahill.
Aye.
Toledo.
Aye.
13 ayes, 0 nays, 1 vacancy.
13 ayes, 0 nays, 1 vacancy. And I did that, Alderman Levin, just so that you know, we are adjourned. I did that because I forgot we didn't have anybody on the phone. We are adjourned. Thank you.